I'd like to begin tonight by asking you a question, and I'd like you to just answer silently with your very first answer. The value in this question comes from your gut response, not what comes when you think about it for a few minutes. So here is the question. Who are you? What was your gut response? Was it your name? Was it your job or your station in life? Was it your position in your family in some way? What was it? Whatever it was, before we go on, would you say that was your gut response? Is it your final answer? Or are you finding yourself wanting to change it? Maybe some of you know the name Justin Welby. He's actually an archbishop, not in our church, but he's the Archbishop of Canterbury, which is in the Episcopal Church. In fact, that position is basically like being the Pope for the Episcopalians. That's just a good way to understand him. He has been the leader of the Church of England, that's the Episcopal Church, since 2012. And he's doing a great job. He's been leading that whole worldwide church for 6, going on 7 years now. But a couple of years ago, he wound up having his identity rocked in a very public way. He was questioned right to the core of who he was, right in front of the world. There was a British newspaper that did an in-depth study of his life, the way you might do if you're really getting to know someone important. Maybe at the level that the CIA would do it. And they came back with a shocking conclusion. They said, based on what we've studied about your life and what we know about you, we don't think the man you think is your father is really your father. His father had died in 1977, and he had known him as his father his whole life. They said, we don't think that's your father. In doing some digging, it seems like your real father might be a diplomat who worked with Winston Churchill. And that is probably the man who has your DNA. So they said to him publicly, would you submit to a DNA test? And he said, absolutely. His mother was still alive, by the way. He said, right, Mom? She said, yeah, sure, honey. Well, the test came back, and the paper was right. His father was not his father. That diplomat had actually been his father. Can you imagine what his mother was going through at that time? It happened in front of the whole world. And so there was a press conference, and he came out, and everyone was waiting to see what his response was going to be. And he said, yes, it's true that I'm sad that the man I thought was my father is not my biological father, but he'll always be my father. And he said, you know, going through this process has allowed me to see my parents a little more humanly, and I recognize that their story has a lot of highs and lows, and really, in the end, it's a story about how good God can be to us no matter what. And then he said this, I know that I find who I am in Jesus Christ, not in genetics. And my identity in him never changes. What a good moment for the world to hear someone say, yes, this is a little surprising, but you don't get to say who I am. God says who I am. And God's already said that. So you can do whatever test you want. I might wind up having a surprising result, but it doesn't change who I am. I'm not who you say I am. I'm who God says I am. That's what's going on in the gospel tonight as well. People are looking at John and saying, you're the Christ, aren't you? You're the Christ. Meanwhile, Jesus is in line over here, and people think he's a nobody. But Jesus has this incredible experience at his baptism. He gets to hear his heavenly Father say, you are my beloved Son. In you I am well pleased. And that was what he used for the rest of his life to make sense out of everything he went through. He faced a lot of rejection and disapproval, but he knew who he was. He was God's beloved son. His mission was clear, and so he lived it. And you know, there are many people today who love and respect Jesus and will spend hours praying in front of him, but there's plenty of people who don't, and there's plenty of people then who didn't either. And in fact, if you go through the scriptures, some of the things people said about him were unbelievable. He was called a glutton. He was called a drunkard. He was called a friend of sinners, and that wasn't a compliment. He was called a blasphemer. At one point, he was called the prince of demons. Can you imagine? So what did he do? During that whole time, he had to cling to what the Father had said about him at his baptism. He had to say, I'm not who you say I am. I'm who God says I am. And the ability to do that made his self-identity fireproof. Have you ever wondered why Jesus chose to get baptized? Why would God need to be baptized? Why would God's Son on earth need to go through a ritual of baptism? It's because it was the way that he gave us to share his identity. He shared his identity with us through baptism. And because of baptism, people like Justin Welby can say, because of Christ, my identity never changes. Whatever our job is, whatever our situation in life, whatever we find out about ourselves through a DNA test, it doesn't change the essence of who we are. Because baptism gives us that assurance, that identity. We wind up having nothing left to prove. So this week, we are being invited to wrestle with that question I started off with. Just what is your identity? In what basket are you placing all your eggs? Let's go back to that first question. Who are you? Did you say a job? Did you say a role? What are you going to do when you're retired? What are the retired people here now? Their identity is what they used to be? Did you answer with a relationship? I'm the spouse of, I'm the child of, I'm from the family of. What happens when you move to California and no one knows your family? What happens when you're a widower or a widow? Did you come up with your family name as who you are? I'm a blank. What if a DNA test took that all away, just the way it did with the Archbishop of Canterbury? Is it the way you look? Because I've got terrible news about that. I saw a picture of myself from 10 years ago. It doesn't look like right now. And we're all going in that direction. We're all going the same direction. The bad news about how we're going to look in the future is probably not better than now. So where is it that we place our identity? Are we able to say, my identity never changes? I know who I am in Jesus Christ, and that does not change. I don't depend on genetics. I don't depend on a job or an identity. I don't depend on a marriage or being known as the person who's with that person. I don't depend on that. That doesn't change my identity. That never changes. If we keep hitching our identity to things that people say or about circumstances in our life, then we'll never have peace. Because we'll always be just one step away from losing the job and losing our identity with it. Burying the spouse and no longer knowing who we are. Maybe messing up somehow and losing our reputation and not having anything to hold on to. Looking in the mirror and not recognizing what we see and feeling like we're lost. So whatever it is that you said when I asked, who are you? Don't let that be your final answer, unless it's the answer that the Archbishop gave. I'm not who you say I am. I'm who God says I am.